In the 19th century, if you looked at a map, one of the last truly blank spots for Europeans wasn't some remote jungle or a frozen pole, it was a city. A city so sacred, so forbidden, that for an outsider to even try to get inside, well, that was a death sentence. Today, we're going to follow the one man who looked at that absolute prohibition not as a barrier, but as a personal invitation. This is the incredible story of the Pilgrim Spy. So let's just be crystal clear about what was on the line here. We're talking 1853. The holy cities of Mecca and Al-Medina were, as the explorer Richard Burton himself called them, a jealously guarded and exclusive harem. This wasn't like a no trespassing sign you could just ignore. No, this was an absolute lethal prohibition. If you were discovered as a non-Muslim inside the sacred limits, there wasn't going to be a trial. You weren't getting deported. The penalty was death, period. And it was often carried out brutally and immediately by the very first person who figured you out. And this is the guy who heard that warning and probably just smiled. Captain Sir Richard Burton. He was, and there's no other way to put this, a complete original. A brilliant soldier, a world-class scholar, a linguist who was fluent in dozens of languages, and an explorer with this defiant, almost obsessive curiosity. And in that era of empires and espionage, what they called the Great Game, a man with his unique skills was basically a secret weapon. So when the famous Royal Geographical Society told him his plan was of too dangerous a nature, Burton didn't hear a warning, he heard a challenge. This quote right here, it gets to the very core of who he was. He believed deep down that he was the exception to every single rule, the one man who could walk through fire and not even smell of smoke. Now, Burton knew that to pull this off, he couldn't just throw on a costume. No way. He had to become someone else. Completely. This wasn't about acting. It was about forging a new identity, a new soul, a new history from the ground up. This was the birth of a man named Sheikh Abdullah. So who was this guy, Sheikh Abdullah? Well, every single detail was a piece of psychological armor. Burton chose to be an Afghan, right? Smart move. Afghans were known travelers, and their features were more diverse, making him physically harder to place. He was raised in India, another brilliant touch that gave him a perfect excuse for any tiny imperfection in his Arabic. He was a doctor, which instantly gave him a level of respect and a plausible reason to ask all sorts of questions and interact with people from every walk of life. And maybe most importantly, he was a dervish, a kind of wandering holy man. This was the perfect cover. It gave him an excuse to be a loner, to be poor, and to be constantly on the move, all without raising the slightest bit of suspicion. This wasn't a mask he put on in the morning. This was his new reality, 24/7. You really can't overstate the level of prep work here. It was staggering, almost fanatical. Look, it wasn't enough to just speak Arabic. He had to master the specific regional dialects of the places he claimed to be from. It wasn't enough to just know the prayers. He had to perfect every single bow, every prostration, every subtle variation practiced by different schools of Islamic thought. He memorized hundreds of tiny cultural tells, how you're supposed to eat, how to haggle in the market, how to sit, even how to show respect or contempt without saying a word. His entire life story was a script he had to live and breathe, ready for a pop quiz at any moment. And all the while, his gold coins and important papers were hidden away in a custom Maghrabi leather belt, the classic way to hide your valuables. It was his secret lifeline, worn right against his skin. All right, the journey begins. And the very first test was Egypt. Burton himself described the country as having a police force as curious as in Rome or Milan. So here, in the crowded streets, on the packed boats of Alexandria and Cairo, among people who could spot a foreigner in a heartbeat, the performance of Sheikh Abdullah was about to begin. Seriously, just try to imagine the mental strain, the constant crushing pressure of it all. You can't relax for a single second. Every gesture you make is a test. The way you bargain for a piece of bread, the way you react to a crying child, the tone of voice you use with a shopkeeper, every single one of your natural ingrained European instincts has to be shoved down, buried. Every thought, every action has to first go through the filter. What would Sheikh Abdullah do? Because one mistake, one unconscious slip-up, it wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be game over. His journey up the Nile on this crowded steamboat was a masterclass in performance art. First thing he does, he physically separates himself from the other European travelers, the infidels, as he called them. While they were drinking their tea, he was putting on a show of extreme piety. He wrote that the dignity of darwishhood wouldn't allow him to eat with them. So he just sat there munching on bread and garlic with what he hilariously called a desperate sanctimoniousness. He was basically performing his holiness for everyone around him.
He'd pray loudly and very publicly, his massive prayer beads always in his hands, a constant visible symbol of his supposed faith.
And this is where you see the true genius of the man, the almost microscopic level of detail he mastered. He knew that your real identity is revealed in the smallest, most unconscious actions. So take something as simple as drinking a glass of water. A Westerner, just lifts the glass and drinks. But Sheikh Abdullah, oh no. For him, it's a whole ritual. He clutches the glass, recites a quick prayer, and only then takes 3 distinct, deliberate, pious sips. He's careful to breathe away from the cup between sips, which is proper etiquette, and then he finishes with another prayer of thanks. This tiny little act, something he did hundreds of times, was a constant public reinforcement of the lie. It was brilliant. So, having survived the intense social scrutiny of Egypt, Burton now had to face the raw, physical dangers of the next leg of the journey. We're talking about the brutal, unforgiving desert and the treacherous Red Sea. Here, the threats weren't just about someone getting suspicious. The threats were thirst, bandits, scorching heat, and shipwreck. Burton was just a magnificent writer, and he captured the terrifying beauty of the desert perfectly. It was a place of stainless beauty, absolutely. But it was also a place where the simoon, the poison wind of the desert, could feel like it was a lion with flaming breath. He wrote that for a lone traveler, the wilderness could stimulate the mind to its absolute pitch. It was a landscape so beautiful, it could literally kill you. Okay, so let's talk about his ship for crossing the Red Sea. It was called a Sambuk, and this one had the lovely name Golden Wire. Let's just run down the specs on this thing, shall we? You've got a 50-ton boat, mostly open to the elements. Now for the safety checklist. Compass? Nope. Nautical charts? Are you kidding? No. Tools to measure the water's depth to avoid, crashing into reefs? None. They didn't even have spare ropes. This wasn't a ship. It was a 50-ton prayer, navigated by memory and sight alone, across one of the most dangerous seas in the world. Now picture that vessel, that 50-ton death trap with 0 safety gear. How many people do you think they crammed onto it for a journey that would take days under a blistering sun? The number is 97. 97 human beings plus all their animals and luggage packed in there shoulder to shoulder with almost no shelter. The heat, the stench, the thirst, it must have been an absolute floating nightmare. And, the greatest danger on that boat wasn't the sun or the sea or the risk of shipwreck, it was the other passengers. A lot of them were Maghrabis, North Africans, who were known for their fierce piety and their deep suspicion of outsiders. Burton knew, he absolutely knew, that on this vessel there would be no trial, no second chances. The slightest mistake, one word of English muttered in his sleep, a moment of shock instead of prayer, any sign at all of being a Frank, a European, and he would have been tossed overboard to the sharks without a second thought. So after enduring the trials of Egypt, the horrors of the desert, and that terrifying trip across the Red Sea, Burton is finally approaching the whole point of this insane quest. He arrives, not first at Mecca, but at the second holy city, Al-Medina, the city of the Prophet. For a true believer, this is the reward for all that suffering. Can you even imagine the feeling? Months of just relentless tension, of living a lie every single waking second, of being constantly hungry, thirsty, and in mortal danger. And then, finally, through the shimmering heat, the minarets of the holy city appear on the horizon. The psychological relief must have been incredible, but I bet it was immediately replaced by a whole new, even more intense level of anxiety. He'd made it. He was now at the very heart of the one place on Earth he was forbidden to be. Burton, ever the spy, is just watching this all unfold with an anthropologist's eye. He describes this incredibly powerful, genuine emotion of the real pilgrims as they arrive. Sons are just weeping with joy seeing their mothers. Old friends are embracing after years apart. He noted that Arabs are of a more affectionate nature than the Persians, and their manners are far more demonstrative. And right there, in the middle of this beautiful, authentic outpouring of faith and love, stands Burton, the ultimate outsider, his own feelings locked down, his real purpose a total secret. And here's this fascinating detail that Burton noticed. It's all about appearances. At the city gates, there was this amazing transformation. The pilgrims who had just crossed the desert looking like they were on their last legs suddenly pull out these fine silk garments from their luggage. Why? The goal was to enter the city not as weary travelers, but as successful men, to prove that their pilgrimage had been blessed, that it had been profitable. It's this powerful reminder that, Burton wasn't the only one putting on a performance.
Everyone, in their own way, was carefully crafting an image.
You'd think arriving would finally end the danger, but no, it just magnified it. Now, inside the sanctuary, the very tools of his trade were useless. He couldn't sketch the holy sites. He couldn't openly take notes. That would immediately get him flagged as a spy, or even worse, a sorcerer. Every map he made, every measurement of a building, he had to do it secretly, by counting his own footsteps and then scribbling it down later. Every observation had to be burned into his memory. He was now surrounded by the most devout believers in the world, in the holiest of places. The scrutiny was at its absolute peak. One wrong move here, and it was all over. So Burton didn't just get in, he got out. And what he brought back with him would completely change how the Western world understood the Arabian Peninsula, forever. So let's take a look at the real legacy of this unbelievably audacious journey. When you look at this timeline, you really get a sense of the sheer scale of this thing. This wasn't some quick in-and-out mission. He leaves London in April, goes through all the tests in Egypt in May, makes that terrifying Red Sea crossing in July, and finally reaches Mecca in September to perform the Hajj. That's a 5-month performance. 5 straight months where he could never, ever let his guard down, never break character, living every single moment under a death sentence. And he did it. He succeeded. He didn't just survive. He completed the entire pilgrimage to both Medina and Mecca, performing every single ritual right alongside devout believers. When he got back to England, his book, A Personal Narrative of a Pilgrimage to Medina and Mecca, became an international sensation. Before Burton, this whole part of the world was basically a mystery to the West, filled with rumors and wild speculation. His thousands of pages of meticulous notes on geography, on culture, on religious rituals, they provided the first clear, detailed window into a world that had been totally sealed shut. This chart really boils the whole thing down to its core equation. The first pillar is risk, and that bar is set almost impossibly high, representing constant mortal danger. Now, to meet that level of risk, he needed the second pillar, preparation. His obsessive, fanatical attention to detail had to be just as massive as the danger he was facing. And when that incredible level of preparation successfully cancels out that incredible level of risk, you get the third pillar, impact, a profound, game-changing contribution to knowledge that cemented his legend forever. And so at the end of it all, we're left with this question. And honestly, there's no simple answer. To pull off one of the greatest feats of exploration in history, he had to practice a deep, sustained deception against people who had shown him nothing but hospitality. So what was he? A hero? A scholar? Or a spy in the holiest of places? You know, maybe the only certain answer is that he was, without a doubt, Richard Burton, a man who simply had to see for himself no matter what it cost.